Welcome back to the Kitchen Island. In this video, I'm going to be showing you a range of different nourishing dinners that you can enjoy as a family. So first up is slow roasted pork shoulder, and this is one of my favorite recipes because you can use the shredded pork in so many different ways, from tacos, enchiladas, nachos, to barbecue pork buns. Whatever sounds good. And I love having different meats on hand to use in different ways prepped ahead of time. So first up, you're going to want to mince your garlic cloves and dice your onion. Now you could absolutely saute these in a pan with some ghee, butter, tallow, olive oil, coconut oil, whatever fat that you enjoy, to just make them a little bit more sauteed, softened, a little bit more fragrant. But on this occasion, I didn't want to do that, so I just threw mine into the slow cooker. Next up, you're going to want to prepare your pork shoulder or your pork butt. So I scored the fat first of all to make it a little bit easier to render down the fat. And then I made a seasoning mix. Now this had paprika, onion powder, garlic powder, cracked black pepper, salt, and then also this mesquite grilling rub as well that we had, which contains like celery salt, cumin, oregano, and other herbs as well. So it just added a really nice richness and depth of flavor. So you're just going to want to coat that all over the pork. Make sure it just covers each of the sides and just pat it in gently over the meat. And once that is done, you're going to want to add your onions and your garlic as well. Now you can leave your onion kind of in slightly bigger chunks as well if you prefer that, but I just did mine diced because it was a little bit easier, and I was going to be using this recipe for tacos and nachos, and so it was kind of nice to have some of those smaller pieces of onion and garlic in there as well. So next up, you're going to want to add the liquids. So I add the juice of 2 limes, as well as a cup of orange juice, and I also added about a half a cup of pickle juice as well, because that provides a little bit more acidity as well in breaking down the fat and just adding a little bit more richness as well to the braising liquid for the pork. And then I also did a splash of apple cider vinegar as well. Once all of your liquids are added into the slow cooker, you're going to want to put it on low for about 12 hours. It kind of depends on the size of your pork shoulder. I personally actually let it cook overnight because I really wanted it to be nice and tender, the meat to just really pull apart. And that's just a really great way as well to get the most out of the different amino acids, the gelatin, the collagen that is in meat that has the bone in still and has fat, a good layer of fat as well. So it just renders down nicely and is just really rich in all of that deliciousness. And then once it was done, I shredded it, pulled it all apart, and let it just braise in the liquid for a couple more hours. And then when I wanted to serve it with the tacos, I just transferred it to a baking dish and put it on broil for a couple of minutes so that it could get a little bit more crispy. The next recipe is a really easy sheet pan dish of baked salmon and squash. So first of all, you're going to want to get out your wild caught salmon, and I drizzled mine in some extra virgin olive oil. You could also melt some ghee or some butter as well, and that would just add a really nice richness to the fish too. And then I squeezed the juice of a lemon over the top of the fish as well. And I really wanted this to have just a little bit more freshness to go with just the more kind of rich starchiness of the roasted squash, Brussels sprouts, and carrot. So again, I'm just mincing up some garlic, which seems to be the basis of every delicious dinner recipe. You're going to want to mince it up nice and finely and add that to the salmon as well. And then I'm also going to add some honey for a little added sweetness and to balance out the acidity of the lemon, and add a little bit of fresh cracked black pepper and salt. Next, you're going to want to prepare your vegetables. So I cut up my acorn squash into kind of quite thin slices, and I chopped up my carrots and Brussels sprouts as well, and I drizzled the acorn squash in some olive oil. Because the root veggies will take a little bit longer to roast than the salmon, I pop those in the oven first at about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 205 degrees Celsius. And I just keep an eye on it, kind of rotating the pans, moving the veggies around just to make sure that they get nice and tender as well as a little bit crispy. And then I'll add the salmon. And as you can see, I somewhat overcooked the salmon, but I did want the skin to get a little bit crispier, and I just had to wait until the veggies were done because they took a little bit longer than I expected. So if you do want them to roast a little bit faster, I would definitely recommend cutting them a little bit smaller and putting them in probably like 25 minutes to half an hour before you put in the salmon, because depending on how thick your piece of fish is, it may cook a lot quicker. The next recipe is chicken noodle soup. Now, as I mentioned before, sometimes I like to prep double the amount of things so that I can reuse them for different recipes. So I actually cooked double the amount of Brussels sprouts and carrots to be able to use in this soup recipe, which is really nice because they've already been roasted. They have a lot of nourishing fat and seasonings and herbs on them that add a lot more flavor. So they're just going to get a lot more tender and add just more depth to the soup as it cooks. So I'm just dicing up my onion and garlic, and again, you could saute it, but for time and efficiency, I didn't. I just threw it into the crock pot. Now in my chicken noodle soup, I love to add citrus, whether lime, lemon, or both. It just adds a really nice freshness, but a really needed acidity as well, because this is just a really hearty dish, but you need that to just add a little brightness and break it up a little bit. So I also add about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of onion powder and garlic powder, as well as thyme and basil. You could also add other herbs like rosemary, but I just used what I had on hand, as well as some fresh cracked black pepper and a little bit of turmeric, probably about 1/4 teaspoon of that. And then you could also add other fresh herbs like parsley and cilantro, which I do here, and I just think that makes a really big difference to the soup, feeling just a little bit more fresh and just rich in flavor as well. And then I add some bone broth as well to cover all of that. So once the soup has been cooking for a little while on low, I actually added in a couple of frozen chicken breasts. So once that was done, I took that out and shredded it and added that back into the soup. And then I also added some pasta noodles, kind of with about half an hour left so that they could absorb the liquid and soften and get nice and plump in the soup. Once your pasta noodles are done, you are ready to serve. So I like to top the soup with a little bit of fresh lemon juice, some grated cheese. So in this case, I use some Gruyere because that is what I had to hand, and it's actually really delicious because it melts so nicely into the soup. And then I also add a sprinkle of some roasted pumpkin seeds that I seasoned with paprika and sea salt. This next recipe is crispy chicken tenders and salad. So first up, you're going to want to prepare the different dippings and coatings that you need to use for the chicken. So I used 1 egg that I whisked together with about 2 tablespoons of whole milk. And then you're going to want to prepare the next batter, which is going to be about 1/3 cup of flour, and into that you're going to add your seasoning. So I used about 1/2 teaspoon of paprika, a tablespoon of onion powder, a tablespoon of garlic powder, a generous pinch of sea salt, and about 1/4 teaspoon of cracked black pepper. And then you're just going to want to make sure that that is all mixed together. And I also used some sourdough breadcrumbs. They were a little bit on the chunkier side because I didn't roast them in the oven and get them crispy. If I did, I'd crisp them up with a little bit of olive oil, roast them at like 300 for about 15 minutes, and then get them nice and small, but I didn't have time for that. And I also did some without breadcrumbs, which actually tasted really delicious because you got more of the seasoning flavor. So here you can see me making a hot honey garlic sauce. So I mixed together about 3 tablespoons of honey, 2 cloves of minced garlic, and about a teaspoon of paprika. And you're going to want to mix that all together. And then I also added a splash, about a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar to just water it down a little bit more and thin it out. And then you're going to want to slowly warm this on the stove closer to when your chicken is done. Do not walk away from it like I did, because the honey will caramelize and it will turn to toffee and you will not be able to use it. It was really delicious, but mine turned to toffee and I couldn't use it. But once you can see that it's slightly deepened in color and is slightly thickened up but not too much, you're going to want to take it off of the heat right away, and then you can add your chicken tenders into it to coat them. So next up, you're going to want to put your chicken tenders in the flour mix first, and then transfer them into the egg mix, and then into the breadcrumbs. And then with the ones that you're not coating in breadcrumbs, if you don't want to use breadcrumbs, then what I would do is I do the flour mix, the egg mix, kind of shake off any excess egg, and then put it back in the flour mix, and that adds a nice extra layer to get a little bit crispy, and you just get a much more intense flavor as well. Whilst I am doing this, I'm warming up about 1/4 cup of coconut oil in a shallow pan. I don't use too much oil, just enough to be able to crisp up the edges and just cook it through. So once that is warmed up and you can hear it sizzling, you can add your chicken into the pan. I like to wait at least kind of 4 to 5 minutes so that each side can get a just nice deep golden brown color, and then I'll turn it over and cook the other side. And then I also pop them in the oven in the cast iron skillet for about 15 minutes on 350 Fahrenheit just to make sure it cooks through and to give a little extra crisp. Now you could prepare a salad from scratch, but I just had one on hand from the grocery store, which makes it just nice and easy on those weeknights when you want something quick and nourishing.